So for today, it is going to be it's going to be a clan war between ODM and EC. We have 24 players lined up today, including myself, and I will be casting the games, keeping track of the score as we progress through the event. Should be pretty fun. There's no prize pool, but I'm expecting quite a few good games today, as many of the players here are quite notable. So with that out of the way, let's jump into the first game between Razel and Senior T. So kicking off the tournament, we finally loaded in for the game between Razel and Senior. It is going to be Beastmen against Skaven, and a little bit of an unconventional Beastmen build immediately. We're going to be seeing a double Cygor, with one of them being the Eye of Morsliab, with that wonderful net ability. Has fairly short range, so we'll see if it actually comes into play here. For the infantry, it's going to be a lot of Chaff, Ungor, Spearmen, and Herd, and that's it. There's nothing more elite. And this is not going to be killing the front line. Instead, that's going to be all these Centaurs and Chaos Warhounds with poison. For the hero squad, not a single chariot to be seen, as it's going to be Mogre, the Shadow Gave, with his 2 Chaos Spawn summons, and a Bray Shaman of Death, taking on the hero slots with only Spirit Leech. A little bit of an interesting choice, looking to snipe out some Lords, probably expecting a more prolonged game, especially with the double Cygor. We'll see if he actually pays off. But the caster that I missed, another one on foot too. Bray Shaman of Beasts with the usual Manticore summon will be really good for sniping out single entities. So that's going to be it for the Beastmen. For the Skaven, we'll be seeing a classic defensive formation here. Warp Grinders, Hell Pit Abomination, Mortis effect from a Plague Priest with the usual summons, and some Rat Ogres to hold up the line with Clan Rats mixed in for good measure. This hero blob here is going to be especially scary. The likes of Manticore summons will not be enough to actually kill them off all on their own, and Throt with his mobility could actually snipe out a few targets. Getting into the game though, it will actually come down a lot to how the forces decide to advance. The Poison Wind Mortars have a chance of actually out DPSing these Cygors, but they won't really be able to easily find damage onto these stealthed Ungor Spearmen. So the Skaven immediately deciding to advance, just getting into range with their guns and possibly wanting to rush down the 2 Cygors here. But honestly, there aren't a whole ton of threats for the Cygors to really hit. They could go for the weapon teams, but right now, just picking away at some Skaven slaves. It will reinforce the Beastmen front line, but the front line for both sides are not going to be a huge threat. The game will come down to these single entities and how well that fight goes. Beastmen have many ways to boost that fight in their favor. So let's see how it plays out as the skirmishers, they take to the flanks. And in general, not too much skirmishing is going on. Just wasting some ammunition of the Poisoned Wind Mortars. But I'm getting a feeling that they'll probably have to be dealt with before... they'll have to be dealt with in some way. And surprisingly enough, the 2 Cygors seem to be doing the job as they bring down the Mortars to half HP with a single volley with their large rocks. A second one coming in misses the Mortars. And we'll see if they actually get routed off. If they do begin running, it should be an easy chase off with the mobility of the Beastmen. But they only have a few mobile units nearby to chase them. Now the frontline engagement has started. Both sides have very cheap infantry, so that fight should take a while. And it's going to get tipped heavily in the favor for the Skaven as soon as their single entities engage. And there we go. An immediate terror rout from the Ungor Spearmen herd. But... what looks to be a summon actually coming down already, coming in for the Skaven to push through the front line. The center for the Beastmen should be falling fairly quickly, but the Poison Wind Mortars have been routed off, and a huge pick on the left flank. If these Rat Ogres are to rout, then that's going to be very nice for the Beastmen. They want to be getting rid of all these high DPS units, all the monstrous troops, as quickly as possible. But it looks like they actually do barely keep it together thanks to the support of Throt. The Cygors now are moving into the melee, looking to fight into these Rat Ogres. It's going to be a little bit inefficient for them, but their DPS and Terror should be able to win that fight. A Manticore summon almost dives in there, but instead goes for the Plague Priest, a really nice choice, to make sure that the Mortis Engine effect doesn't kill off all your infantry. And as the game continues to progress, things are looking fairly even here. The Plague Priest has actually taken a lot of damage, and that should bring the favor to the Beastmen on the single entity front. But it might not be enough. The Skaven do still have very strong forces. The Throt, the Unclean, and the Hell Pit Abomination will be very hard to take down with the double Cygors. We'll have to see if maybe some Chaos Spawn can come into support as the game progresses. And the Manticore actually getting taken out by the single entities there is going to be reducing its value by a lot. That's a huge swing for the Skaven. But the Beastmen are still doing fairly well. They've been able to run off a lot of the Skaven forces. And eventually it seems like we will be heading into the classic Skaven situation, where their extremities are picked apart and it's just going to be a blob. And it's going to be quite the blob indeed, especially with these Warp Grinders. A big pick coming in onto the Eye of Morsliev 2, with no support actually coming down. If I were the Beastmen, I would be a little bit worried here. Even if they do manage to kill off this Plague Priest, these single entity killing specialists are going to be a huge problem here. Now some Warhounds do come in to chase off some of these troops, but Eye of Morsliev is about to get routed off. There is still a second Cygor unit, but no damage has actually gone down onto the Hell Pit Abomination or Throt. They're still at very high HP, and we'll see if they can actually get taken down. A second Manticore summon is still available, and that could definitely switch the tide into the favor of the Beastmen if it can land some good hits. Now, the Skaven front line too has actually held surprisingly well, as there are no Gore Herd here for the Beastmen, but some Wolves get to rout off some Clan Rat Spears. The Cavalry is cycle charging, and it looks like it's just a couple of Clan Rats left. I'm hearing the Manticore summon now too. Comes in, and a big surround onto the Hell Pit Abomination is going to be a pretty decisive play. We'll see how well this Manticore actually does, because if it can kill off the single entities here, that will definitely be a win for the Beastmen. Going to dive in on the Plague Priest, not a bad choice given how much Beastmen infantry and cavalry there is left. You definitely want to kill the Mortis Engine in that case. And it gets in some pretty good damage, but the Plague Priest does manage to escape. Nevertheless, he is really beat up, a Spirit Leech even coming down on top of him, and a huge Centaur charge coming in hot onto that Plague Priest will be surrounding him and likely killing him off. Meaning that now at this point, it's just the single entities of, it's just the Hell Pit and Throt the Unclean now against quite a few Beastmen forces. There are quite a few Centaurs, quite a few Warhounds, of course, possibly prone to terror routes, but there's actually quite a bit of support left for the Beastmen. Double Cygors are caught up in the fight against the Hell Pit Abomination and doing surprisingly well. This Cygor at basically no HP, 1000 HP left, but still very high leadership, will be helping in this fight quite a bit. Mogre, the Shadow Gave, still alive too, but pretty beat up. And this could still be a little bit of a scary situation. The Manticore is now out of the battlefield, and all of a sudden we're seeing a big rout come in from the forces of the Beastmen. Terror coming in as I guess the troops are really just too battered to take out this engagement. The Plague Priest snipe was good, but there's no infantry that actually here to support the situation, so it doesn't really matter that the Plague Priest is gone. Nevertheless, the Cygors, still decent single entities in their own right, actually do manage to rout off the Hell Pit Abomination, but will a heal proc come down? The too horrible to die effect is absolutely brutal. If it does, if it does proc, and that could swing the favor wildly into the Skaven side if it actually goes down. Throt 2, engaged in melee against the heroes of the Beastmen, is going to be able to fight fairly well. It's a little bit of an even fight here given how many heroes there are. And the big important moment, will this help hit Abomination heal? It seems like likely not, as another hit comes down from the Cygor, slamming it in the head, causing it to rout, and it's going to be really important to chase it off here, as instead it just dies outright, spawning those Skaven slaves. Throt gets routed off, and that's going to be a win coming in from the Beastmen of Razel. ODM coming, starting off strong with a solid win, showing that Beastmen do still have bite, with the surprising picks of the double Cygor actually getting in decent value, and probably the most useful use here, aside from the single entity fight, was sniping out these poison wind mortars. If the mortars were able to continue firing for longer, the frontline fight could have gone very differently. And also having the Manticore support was absolutely huge, sniping out the Plague Priest and even getting a bit of damage on the Hell Pit Abomination too, seeming like there was just barely enough to kill off the single entities for the Skaven. So here we go. For the second game between ODM and EC, we have Cow against Showtime. And to start off with Cow's build, we are seeing a Vampire Coast build with 4 mortars coming in to face up against the Greenskins, very deadly against the archers, and also very hard to snipe out using very hard to snipe out using the Doom Divers. They actually have a pretty hard time killing off mortars, and given how many they are, these should be able to stay operational unless they get rushed in melee. With the front line, we are seeing many deckhand mobs, even some halberds in the back to prevent any spiders from charging in. Flyers in the air, actually deck dropper bombers, and a big old line of sirens. We'll have to see if Showtime actually has the magic damage to kill off this many sirens. Most Greenskin builds won't have magic damage unless you're actively taking it, so that might be missed out here. A unit of the Black Spot too to snipe out single entities will be quite threatening, and for the hero squads, we are seeing normal Vampire Fleet Admiral Polearm, pretty uncommon, but acts mostly like a discount Noctilus, coming in with the usual kit, the summons, and the Nahak, along with 2 gunnery whites to provide ammunition for those bombers. A really nice anti-archer play, and Showtime's gonna have to be worried, because we are indeed seeing a pretty heavy archer style coming in from him. 5 archer units, one of which being the Rusty Errors, the rest being Savage Orc Archers, are going to be peppering down any bombers, keeping flyers away. 2 casters, and actually going for a Night Goblin Shaman and an Orc Shaman with Vindictive Glare and Brain Burster. That's going to be very important magic damage against the Sirens, and we'll be keeping an eye on this guy, since if he gets sniped out, that's basically the only magic damage that Showtime is going to be bringing. His infantry backline is going to be many Orc Boys and Goblins, keeping it fairly cheap. The Goblin Fanatics, as always, as they are a very powerful unit. And the mobility and monstrous troops, it's going to be some chariots, some squig hoppers, and some spider riders, really taking a little dip in everything. Even another second unit of squig hoppers is going to be really nice for flanking around the coast backline. But we'll see if they actually manage to make it through. There's a lot of melee troops here, and we don't know if this formation will be easy to actually dive in on. The Lord 2 is going to be Grom the Paunch, coming in with just the Lucky Banner and another ability by the looks of it, actually. Language of the Boys, immune to psychology, is going to be really effective against the Sirens, actually. And the Swamp Things coming in. We'll see if they manage to pay for themselves here, as they are just a high AP unit, and they're more of a contingency against crabs, which in this case, Cow has decided not to bring. Good luck, have fun to both players. Yep. Feel free to start. And here we go. It's going to be an initial march in from Showtime, with actually the gunnery whites coming in with the extra accuracy buff. You almost never see this ability. It's going to be the enchanted ballistics that's going to be allowing these mortars to fire very rapidly, and immediately we're seeing the effects of that hammering into these savage orc archers, getting in quite a bit of damage. One of the main advantages here of taking out the archers is that Cow can actually take a much tighter formation with his army, and he can just focus on winning those melee engagements as best as they can, using the mortars to support and rout off troops as quickly as possible. From the Paunch moving in immediately, he actually has very few units to fear here, especially even all chariots, since there is only one range unit. So we'll see how that advantage is used. Currently getting mucked and bogged down by the enhanced mass of these zombies. We'll have a little bit of a difficult engage, but not taking too much damage. And the timer is on for Showtime, but some reserve units actually being forgotten about could actually turn out pretty badly for Showtime, because he needs to be jumping in onto the back line. But it could still work out. The zombies are going to get burned down, but the main problem here is these sirens. They'll be able to hold the front line for much longer, and some nice play from Cow moving up with these zombies to stall out the front line and pushing back the archers so they can't actually shoot at the mortars. A lot of damage has already gone down on many of these archers, and we're even seeing one of them getting routed off the map very early on. This is already looking like a pretty solid start. Some bombs hitting up these night goblins too. You want to push them past the threshold so that they can no longer throw fanatics, and it looks like that will be coming down soon. As for the back line, some squig hoppers do finally dive in onto the back line, and this is going to be an absolutely huge play. Taking out those mortars will really enhance and protect basically all of the greenskins infantry here. The reserve troops are coming back in too. And do these guys have magic damage? Not currently. Oh, actually, wait, it looks like they might have a magic damage buff on them. I'm not sure, but it has worn off. These sirens will be able to hold for a while, but the Wa is still quite powerful. And even without brain bursters coming down onto these troops, the sirens will still be having a pretty hard time versus this many greenskins. And with the mortars now going down, the archers even rallying, we're going to be seeing a pretty big problem for the Vampire Coast. Even though they've been able to secure a very nice initial lead against the greenskins, all these archers rallying and coming back without being chased off are going to be a really big problem, since there's not much to actually rout them down at this point. Squig hoppers finishing up the rest of the mortars will be paying for themselves greatly here, and another very huge threat, both metaphorically and literally. Grom the Paunch waiting in the back with full HP, slamming into some sirens, as honestly no threats to take him down here, especially with the huge infantry advantage from the greenskins. Another big brain burst or two on the sirens is looking like it's going to be the end for the Vampire Coast. A really nice start, but not enough to really finish off all these troops. The greenskins will come back and rally and ruin your day pretty hard, and especially with all these chariot support. It seems like the Black Spot just really weren't able to finish off the single entities for the greenskins. At this point, it doesn't seem like there is too much to pull it back here. Of course, some scab scraps could prove rather good. A second rout on the archers would be really nice too, as another rout will get them off the battlefield. But Grom the Paunch is going to be a huge problem here. Scab does go down, a little bit misaligned, does miss a few of the archers, but really well played for both players. And Cow scrapping it out till the end. We'll see what value he can get here. The bombers can actually hit the backs of these troops too, and the by actually routing off the greenskins, you can see some mass routes come in. And possibly a crazy comeback, but without terror, there's not much that can be done. And that should be it. A very interesting mortar build. I think killing off the archers was very important, but they were targeting different archer units. So in the end, many of them actually still managed to stay at fairly high model counts. You can see this one archer here at 36 models, another one at 50, despite being fairly low on HP. It's going to be a pretty nice win from Showtime, really focusing on that quick engagement. If you look at the Sirens, they did not get a ton of magic damage, or they did not get a ton of value. They really want to be diving on top of archers to pay for themselves. And in this case, there was a little bit too much magic damage and a few too many greenskin infantry troops to actually work around. The mortars did pay okay, but the fairly quick engagement did shut them down, and a really big play actually. The squig hoppers being able to dive into the back line made it so that the archers could not actually get routed off multiple times. If the mortars had been able to stay alive, it would have been much closer. But that is how the cookie crumbles, with a second win coming in from ODM. Let's see if EC has what it takes to win it out in the next games. So here we go. For the next match, it's going to be Chaos against Bretonia, the green one versus Saphir. And to start off with the green one, we are seeing a Dragon Ogre build with 3 Dragon Ogres, one of them the ROR, a really nice mobile option against cavalry. Many skirmishers coming into play too. 3 Marauder Horsemen, 2 of which with throwing axes, also a nice tech piece against cavalry and archers alike, especially with these Chaos Warhounds. We're going to have to see if the green one has the micro to keep them alive, since they are really important in the late game to make sure that you're not getting shot to death by the Bretonians. Sartorial coming in too, presumably with final transmutation. Indeed, that's going to be the only spell for Chaos. Really solid for a blob fight, but Bretonia could just deny that engagement using their archers, and that is indeed what we're going to be seeing for Saphir. A build with 5 archers, extremely strong for against the blob, and likely a few of them too, with pox arrows. Looks like 2 of them coming in with that poison effect. Lewin Leon Kerr, as I stated earlier, coming in with his full kit. Missile resist, armor debuffs, and melee defense buffs. He'll be able to take on any blob fights as long as he's not eating final transmutations. A fairly sturdy front line too, with some men-at-arms and some foot squires also. We've been seeing this in the meta a lot recently to counteract the halberd play of Chaos, where they actually do trade fairly effectively. Some peasants too on the flanks, and for the cavalry, it's going to be some questing knights and the champions, Quenelle, ROR questing knights. Should do pretty good against any armored Chaos troops, but in this case, not much is actually very armored. The Dragon Ogres coming in with only 60 means that these knights won't be nearly as important. So heading into the game, of course, like I said earlier, the main goal is shutting down these archers. And given that there are only 3 cavalry units, I would expect the green one to have a fairly nice advantage on that front. His infantry is quite weak though, and he's going to have a really hard time punching through the front line. Even with the support of Sartorial and the Dragon Ogres, the Knights will be able to defend against that. And a nice initial play coming on in. Some Wolves actually diving into the Archers, but the Questing Knights turn just in time to shield them off. In the meantime, Sartorial has engaged onto the center here. And Lewin is actually getting in a lot of damage onto Sartorial. But the Punish coming on in with the huge final transmutation. Going to be taking a lot of cavalry models down, and killing these questing knights is going to be extremely important here for winning out the game. Like I said earlier, all these mobile forces will be able to take out the archers, since the cavalry count is actually fairly low. Dragon Ogres diving into is going to be trading out extremely effectively here, but at the cost of Sartorial taking so much damage. On the right flank, the archers are now beginning to focus fire. And with the combination of Lewin, that's going to be a huge hit onto this Dragon Ogre core, taking a lot of damage and likely getting routed off. And we're still not seeing the dive in onto the archers. The skirmish play between the Bretonnian Knights, bouncing back and forth between the front line and the back. I've been able to keep the dogs back for a while, but one of them finally diving in will be able to crush these peasant bowmen and get them to rout really quickly. You can see just a few seconds delay on those questing knights almost get the peasant archers routed off. And surprisingly enough, the Bretonnians have won the frontline fight and even caught out Lewin. A huge play coming in here. His regeneration is gone, and all of a sudden the archers are now getting routed off. The Chaos just winning with a front line of basic marauders. Using those questing knights to support the front line is going to be using the dragon ogres to win out the infantry fights in the front line. It's a nice play from Chaos, and you can see now the balance of power switching to the side of the green one. Another final transmutation on these questing knights too. Will be hammering the knights for a lot of damage, and without the cavalry, Bretonnia is in a really rough situation. Lewin comes back only to rout immediately, and he can quite easily be chased off by these marauder horsemen, but that might not even matter as Chaos is coming out quite ahead. But despite all this going down, it looks like Chaos actually slowly slipping back. Lewin does rally to some heroic peasant mobs, are able to shield these throwing axes from routing off Lewin, and Sartorial has been taking a ton of damage. Given that the front line is just Chaos Marauders for Chaos, if Sartorial dies, we're going to be seeing a lot of routes. The fact that the infantry has actually rallied for Bretonnia too is going to be playing a huge favor for the Bretonnians, as the archers are now online and operational again. All 5 of them firing in, and Lewin going for the Hail Mary play, diving straight onto Sartorial, landing a huge hit, but he still has 700 HP. Lewin, if he routes off one more time, he's going to be off the map too. And a big final transmutation, I think, might have even missed, but gets cancelled, and Lewin is now shattered. But does that even matter? The Bretonnian balance of power is still very strong, and these peasant archers are going to be a huge pain to shut down. Sartorial too, getting caught up by the remaining questing knights, are going to be trying really hard to finish him off to get that huge leadership debuff onto Chaos. And we're seeing a huge just mashup of troops here, with the mobile Chaos units diving into the archers once again. The infantry just a tiny bit out of position. This could actually be quite huge if all the archers actually get shut down, and it looks like that's actually going to be the case. It's a huge rout on the Bretonnian side, and suddenly Chaos is feeling a lot more comfortable, especially with Sartorial just barely clinging on to life, causing terror all around. The balance of power flipping back and forth wildly, and now it's on Chaos to actually chase off these archers. There is very little cavalry left for the Bretonnians, and a decent amount of mobility for Chaos too. The Marauders will be extremely important here, because if these archers come back, they can easily rout off the Dragon Ogres and even the Marauder Horsemen if enough of them are available. Sartorial 2 is going to be a huge point of contention here. If he dies off, that is almost an immediate loss for Chaos, but it doesn't look like that will be happening anytime soon, and these archers are still routing. Oh my goodness, it looks like that is going to be actually huge here, since the Dragon Ogres have no more threats to them. Sartorial too, with very few threats, but he charges directly into spears. May actually take a lot of damage, but the Dragon Ogre support more than enough to keep him safe. And there we go, the balance of power switching back onto the side of Chaos. Looking like it's going to be a pretty decisive victory here, or maybe not decisive, but a very exciting victory, as Chaos looks to just barely manage to pull it back through with the collapse of the archers and the very close play coming in from Sartorial, just barely able to keep alive while killing off Lewin at the same time. this point, it's really just closing out the game. Dragon Ogres killing off this Damsel of Heavens. The Chaos Marauders chasing off the infantry. And there we go. Marauder Horsemen are here. These archers have no chance of coming back. Sartorial, with absolutely no threats, could even fight off this Damsel of Heavens and probably terror out all of these men-at-arms all on his own. This should actually be the Chaos victory now, as there we go. Balance of power swings. It should be army losses soon enough. And there we go. Wow. Saphir tapping out the green one, taking a win for Clan EC. Oh my goodness. With the crazy sartorial play. Lewin very nearly was able to snipe him out, but just barely not able to. Ended up getting routed off, final transmutationed, and just not being able to finish off the game. The front line held out fairly well for the Bretonians. You can see these foot squires, they do actually nearly pay for themselves despite the situation. Just clearing up the marauders, but with 3 dragon ogres, the questing knights just were not able to pay for themselves. So a very nice game. And let's dive into the next one now. Coming in on the Empire side is going to be Azriel of Astora. Coming in for Clan EC with 2 Empire Knights and a unit of Demogryphs, a strong cavalry force, but not overcommitted. Instead, putting in a decent amount of money into the infantry line, a lot of Unbreakable, Flagellant, and Sigmar Sons, with a ranged core of Huntsmen and Silver Bullets. One, focusing better for the armored cavalry of the High Elves, and the other better against the large single entities, such as dragons or hawks. A caster too, Amethyst, coming in with Spirit Leech and Buna for cavalry, most likely, but also a little bit of Lord sniping potential, and Volkmar the Grim with his usual kit AoEs and buffs for the infantry line. We could actually see the Empire win the infantry fight here, but we'll have to see, as the High Elves, or Would You Kindly, is going to be a heavy skirmisher core. 3 Illyrian Reaver archers, 2100 gold spent on that front. Good luck, have fun to the players. And 2 Dragon Princes, that nice heavily armored cavalry force, will be able to do well, but can they actually push past these spearmen? They will be able to win against the Empire Knights, but they definitely don't want to be getting charged or caught in a long fight against Demogryph Knights, unless, of course, they have the surround, the Hero Core 2, summoning the Bretonian Spirit with double Noble and Alariel on a mount, very similar to the Fey Enchantress double Paladin play. This will actually tip any cavalry fight very much in the favor of the High Elves, and their front line is a little bit weaker, but still very strong. 4 Rangers coming in can clear out the chaff very quickly, and archers that don't have to worry about cavalry will be doing quite well, since they'll just be able to loose as many volleys as they want. But a big advantage for the Empire, this the hammer of the Witch's Great Cannon will be able to tip any cavalry fights in the favor of Empire. So there's definitely a lot of back and forth on both sides. We'll just have to see if they're actually able to pull their advantages in. Some arrows coming in onto the Flagellants will help that frontline fight immensely. Hammer of the Witches does take down a lot of Illyrian Reavers though, and the big flank overload is about to get underway. The frontline fight will be mostly stalled out by the Flagellants, and this is going to be the main deciding play here. How this is handled could very drastically change the outcome of the game, and Empire, Azriel is going to very much want to have his guns firing in this situation, just barely keeping those silver bullets alive, and a big charge does come in. Oh my goodness, huge damage onto these Empire Knights, with the High Elves actually getting that charge in. But these Dragon Princes have taken a lot of damage on the approach, one of them on the verge of routing. And we'll see if the healing actually manages to keep them in. Some Demigryph Knights charging into the back of the Dragon Princes too, and we're getting a single route, which means it's mostly going to come down to these single entities and how well they can help in this situation. The range units of Empire 2 are able to fire into this huge blob fight, and that is going to be absolutely huge. You can see these nobles have already taken a huge amount of damage, and Volkmar even helping to take out the second unit of Demigryphs. Some nice play using the Spearmen to actually support, but the counterplay actually with the Illyrian Reavers shutting down the range units of the Empire could swing this cavalry fight, but it looks like it's already been decided. The noble is routed and the Dragon Princes are really beat up, with one of them basically on death's bed. The archers have done very well though at clearing out the front line, but they haven't really done much to shut down the range units of the Empire, one of the most important units to take down. And with the High Elf archers now getting engaged on by Flagellants, it seems like their usefulness in this game will be coming to a close very soon. The double nobles though are still at high HP. They will be able to perform quite well, but this healthy unit of Demigryph Knights is likely going to be the bane of the High Elves here. Even the cannons coming back online, and it doesn't look like there's any more cavalry to shut this down, but the Rangers do finally push through the front line, and if they can help out in and chase off the archers with a few good charges from the High Elves, it could still turn into their favor. But right now we're seeing Dragon Princes engaged on Empire Spearmen is definitely a very bad trade, and the balance of power too even favoring the Empire. Volkmar will be able to continue staying in this fight. He is at very high HP, and even a unit of Empire Knights in the back line cycle charging between the cavalry is going to be a little bit rough, but the Flagellants are actually about to go down, and these archers in the back could actually do really well here. The Demigryph Knights are nearly dead due to the strength of the nobles and their fighting prowess, and these archers without any threats could actually win out the day. Of course, the Volkmar is still a bit scary, but the double noble are quite proficient too, looking like they're about to rout off these Demigryph Knights also. Some Illyrian Reavers online too, shutting down the great cannons, and this could actually come down to a cavalry win for Would You Kindly. With a lot of mobility and range units still operational, the balance of power might not matter as much, especially because these nobles are at high HP, struggling to actually kill off the Amethyst Wizard though, and any picks on the nobles is going to be huge. Volkmar getting in a solid charge against one of them. Looks like he actually terror routs him on the charge, and that noble is going to be running off for a while, but they do not rout. They will be coming back, and that's going to be huge for the High Elves. Big charge onto these huntsmen too, and we're seeing another very close game. Balance of power is heavily favored because Volkmar is on high HP, but his melee defense is really low. He cannot take a fight against two healthy nobles. But where are those nobles? It looks like the hero squad for the High Elves chasing off the Demigryph Knights aren't actually able to support in this battle just yet. But these High Elf archers finally able to find a good position to fire away now, are actually focus firing these huntsmen, moving up very aggressively to shut them down, but that actually puts them into a pretty dangerous position. These highly armored Empire Knights with their shields can actually get into the archers, but it looks like the firepower is just barely enough to get them routed, and now the archers have almost no threats. It's essentially just Volkmar, and he can't really waste his time chasing off archers for the whole game. The double noble and a L'Oreal is going to be a huge problem here for the rest of the Empire forces, even diving in onto the huntsman, a very nice pick. And there's even a unit of rangers too, to really make sure that the Empire infantry will be running into problems. A big engage now on Volkmar coming in too from the two nobles will be good, but a Spirit Leech comes down, a heal from a L'Oreal, and even a Star of Avalorn. It's going to come down to this. If the nobles can win the fight against Volkmar, then the game is over 100%. If they lose to Volkmar, it's just going to be a Lariel, and that's a really very dicey situation. A Grand Soulfire came down over here too, and that means Volkmar does not have it for these Rangers, and that could be it. A Banishment does come down on the Archers though, and the Nobles are almost at their heal cap, which means there's no more healing for them. They're at very low HP, and Volkmar, with just a few lucky hits, could actually kill them out. Lariel isn't supporting in the fight either, since she's routing off the Great Cannon. And here we go. We've reached the late game. The balance of power swinging back into the favor of Would You Kindly. The heroic archers barely able to keep it together in many stages of this game. And it looks like they're going to be closing it out on their own with their shots onto Volkmar. He's actually having a really hard time killing off these nobles. And there we go. Volkmar does go down. And that's going to be a concession from Azrael. Oh my goodness. Surprise comeback from Would You Kindly. GG indeed, with a lot of back and forth. The range units in the mid and early mid game did really well at shutting down the Dragon Princes. That was a very decisive victory for Azrael, or a decisive lead that was secured using that play. They did very well pushing these High Elf archers back to make sure they couldn't support in that engagement. But in the late game, we saw, oh, it looks like my game crashed. Well, that's interesting. Anyways, in the late game, we did see that just the double noble killing off Volkmar, killing off the Demogryph Knights was enough to secure the victory. So here we go. The next match against Croissant, or with Croissant against Francis. It is still ODM against Clan EC, and for the forces of the Empire coming for Croissant, it is going to be a Jade Wizard and Karl Franz coming in with the usual kit, Earthblood and Regrowth. A fairly thin front line of just some Spearmen, with a little bit of holding power in the form of Flagellants and the Sigmar Sons. The main core of the army though is going to be these units of Empire Knights and Demogryph Knights though. Actually, one of them even being the Arawar, a very expensive cavalry corps, with some skirmishers to assist. Outriders, who will be able to perform well if they are able to continue firing, which might not be possible as we look at the army of Francis coming in with an absolutely huge cavalry corps. 3 Feral Cold Ones and 3 Cold One Riders, 2 of them bringing spears, is going to be a lot for these Outriders. I'm expecting them to get chased for much of the game, and it's going to be very important that these Empire Knights do not get surrounded by all these AP cavalry units. As for the infantry of Francis, it's going to be fairly thin, just some red-crested skinks and javelins, with a few chameleon skinks to mix in, as these are almost always a good pick. So that means that a lot more infantry for Croissant can be allocated to help in this cavalry fight. And he'll definitely have to focus on doing that correctly, otherwise we will be seeing him get overwhelmed. Skink Priest of Heavens too, with the Wind Blast ability, is a common pick too, very meta. It's really nice against unarmored troops and will trade really well into Flagellants. Of course, you can't forget the Lord of the Lizardmen, Saurus Oldblood, coming in with the damage resistance buff, and the Horn of Krygor, a nice melee attack buff, looking to be fighting up against Karl Franz and really shifting the fight of any cavalry engagements in the favor of the Lizardmen. So good luck, have fun to both players, and let's see how it goes. The Great Cannon is nice to force the Lizardmen to advance and hopefully get them caught up on these spears, but some strong micro will definitely be able to avoid that. These chameleon skinks too will likely pose a pretty big problem here, So we'll keep an eye on them, and they'll likely be able to push off these Outriders as we head into the skirmish phase of the game. So Chameleon Skinks are moving up. They actually take some pretty heavy damage from the Outriders, but a return volley of darts will be able to push them back. These Chameleon Skinks might even be able to keep the Outriders back for the majority of this game, and then it's just going to be the Spears and the Demogryph Knights to be taking favorable engagements. The Outriders do pull back, but this allows the Flagellants to get taken down, and by pressuring the front line, the Lizardmen will be getting a very nice advantage on the infantry fight, which will pull the Spears away from stopping the cavalry. So this could play very well into the favor of the Lizardmen, but actually these are Skink Skirmishers. The center one even is Skink Skirmishers, and that's why they're taking a lot more damage from the Outriders. They do not have the same missile resist values as the Chameleon Skinks. So a pretty nice trade from the Empire so far, but the Flagellants are still taking a lot of damage, and this cannon is going to continue pressuring the Lizardmen forces. It will make these Chameleon Skink trades a little bit less effective, and eventually the Lizardmen will have to engage. Some shots going into the red crested Skinks is a very good choice, as their high AP is extremely strong against cavalry, and killing off as many of those models early will be proving quite good. Nice play with the Chameleon Skinks too, very aggressively shutting down the Flagellants, and a Wind Blast hitting the Sigmar Suns. Honestly, we're seeing very nice initial trades for the Lizardmen, killing off the unbreakable front line of the Empire. The Empire is trading effectively gold-wise, but that might change very heavily as France suddenly takes a ton of damage from the Chameleon Skinks. You have to be very careful about these skirmishers. They are, if you land close to them with your flying lords, you will be in a world of pain, and that is a lot of damage. It puts the favor in towards the Lizardmen, but some healing does go down, and it's just going to be continued skirmishing. The Empire can't really do much to advance on the Lizardmen, so essentially they just have to weather out the storm, trying to trade out as effectively as possible. A nice charge onto these Skink cohorts will be able to hopefully kill a few models, at least that's what Croissant is hoping for, and keeping them back away from the Outriders will be very important too. But a very important thing to be aware of in the late game, the Empire might not have that much infantry, and infantry support is going to be insanely key here. Skirmishers will be much less important in the late game as they run out of ammunition. And without infantry support, there's a lot of Lizardmen cavalry, but some of them actually do get taken out fairly early by the cannons. And if Francis leave the cavalry force there, they will slowly get picked away. A nice charge too onto these Skink Skirmishers, and we're seeing both sides are still trying as hard as they can to trade in this skirmish phase. France, too, routing off the Skink Skirmishers is very good, but a charge in from the Saurus Old Blood, trying to punish that. But France is going to take into the air, and the Outriders are able to trade in pretty well. But the Outriders are beginning to run out of ammunition, same with the Skink Skirmishers, and we'll have to see who comes out on top as soon as all the ammunition is gone. It could go either way. Cycle charging from the cavalry specifically is one of the best ways to run down the Chameleon Skinks, but that's not always easy. As you can see, Francis playing very well, leaving his infantry here ready to support to make sure that the cavalry don't run down his Skinks. Wind Blasts just continuously coming down have battered the Empire front line, but the cannons have been hitting up the Lizardmen cavalry. So it shall be continuing, but I would put my money more on Francis. I think they've been trading out a little bit better, and their cavalry force has quite an advantage in the form of just raw gold. There is still a ton of cavalry here, and the battered units, they are still at fairly high HP. Some more healing does go down to try and save some flagellants, but it's not going to be extremely worth it. More so just being thrown down on the Empire Knights. And there we go. The Outriders are nearly out of ammunition. This is absolutely huge because it means that the trades for the Lizardmen will suddenly become much more effective without the Outriders constantly poking in. It means that their Lord won't be able to get shot down either by the Outriders, and it means that the Empire has to win a straight up melee fight while getting poisoned by skink skirmishers. It could be a very rough situation. But nevertheless, it could still win for the Empire. The Demogryph Knights, of course, are very elite, and the Outriders do have about a single volley left, but a little bit of a misplay coming in. The Empire Knights actually get caught out by the Saurus Old Blood and some of these Cold One Spear Riders, and this is absolutely huge for the Lizardmen. A very nice pick, as there's only 3 cavalry units for the Empire. The Knights getting brought down to 36 models and 2/3 HP. The Lizardmen nicely pulling back again because they are still trading up into the Empire. The Skink Skirmishers are getting in a ton of value, and they'll be able to continue getting value for quite a while. They have about a quarter of their ammunition left, which means about 3 more minutes of pain for the Empire before the Lizardmen finally have to move into engage. The Outriders, actually one of them, still at decently high ammunition, can continue to poke the cavalry engagements, and this is exactly what Croissant needs to do to pull out the victory. He needs to be winning cavalry fights, and it looks like one might be going on here, but the Feral Cold Ones pull out, and the Cold One Riders actually get charged by the Empire Knights. This is a pretty good engagement for Croissant, getting in some pretty good damage, and the cannon too is able to continue trading into all the cav. The Empire infantry, though, like we said earlier, is extremely battered, and they're going to be having a rough time. But as long as enough of these Cold One Riders get shot down, it will be a pretty nice advantage for Croissant. So we'll see how this plays out as more Cold One Riders come in. It's a mass rout on the infantry front line as the terror kicks in, and now it's going to be a little bit rough. Franz could still provide his terror, but he gets surrounded by some spears, and all of that skirmishing might not matter if Franz actually just gets picked off right here and now. This is many thousands of gold of value being traded into, and even so, the right behind on the left flank of the Empire, a lot of the forces are beginning to buckle, and it's going to be a big melee engagement here. Trading maybe about evenly by the looks of it. Really, the biggest thing was the fact that the Saurus Old Blood was able to take so much damage onto Franz. But we are seeing the remaining spears just barely keeping it together are going to be extremely important in this situation. They've been able to do a lot of damage to the cavalry, but they finally get routed off. As for the artillery, it may finally go down along with these Outriders, but Franz is still alive. The Demogryph Knights are still at decent HP. They'll just have to find a way to actually kill off this Saurus Old Blood. Franz getting in a charge would be the most important, but another surround comes down on top of him, and if Franz dies here, that is going to be game for sure. But the Demogryph Knights do charge in, and suddenly it seems like the Lizardmen are in a little bit of a dicey situation. The cavalry control is a little bit higher here, but the single entities, specifically the Saurus Old Blood, is doing much better. He's been able to get multiple hits on Franz, and a second attack comes in, but it misses. Oh my goodness. Franz able to take off, and it looks like he'll be able to get out of that fight by the skin of his teeth. The Saurus Old Blood having to retreat, but it's enough to rout off many of the Empire Knights. The Outriders are gone, the Empire Knights are gone, and the Demogryph Knights are really beat up, while the Lizardmen still have quite a few forces left to bear. The balance of power is quite in their favor now, and these red-crested skinks in this Lizardmen blob are going to be really pulling down a lot of these knights. Demogryph Knights even getting routed off, and there we go. It looks like that's going to be it it's gonna be a win for the Lizardmen. Francis pulling it out with some really nice skirmishing play, having a good build against the Empire, and in the end, just overwhelming them with the superior infantry and cavalry force. Some really good picks on Franz too was really enough to really secure the win, keeping that source Old Blood alive. And at this point, it's just cleaning up. Indeed, so many Raptors coming in. Despite many losses of cavalry during the mid game, Francis could really just afford to lose all those cavalry, since he was able to overwhelm everything for the Empire. It's just the Sigmar Sons left, and that's going to be game. Oh boy. So there we go. GG. And that's another win for Clan EC. Feeling pretty good about themselves for sure. It looks like we do have quite a clan matchup on our hands. Take a look here at the cavalry. Even though many of them did die, a lot of them did trade out fairly effectively. Specifically, these 4 units of cavalry did quite well. For the Empire side, their cavalry did really well too, but the big problem was that they were getting pulled down by the red-crested skinks and the ROR red-crested skinks. The Empire infantry, you can see, just really weren't able to help out the front line, basically getting no damage at all, and that's really what Francis needed to pull out the win. The next game is going to be Zalo against Carl Harmon, Greenskins against the Lizardmen. We're going to be seeing a fairly infantry heavy greenskin build here, with many goblins, orc boys, and even a unit of black orcs with some orc big guns. Basically every flavor of green you can imagine on the infantry front. The archers taking up the back too are going to be taking every single variant of archers also. Night Goblin archers, Orc archer boys, Savage Orc archer boys, and the Rusty Arrows, a very key unit when it comes to facing the Lizardmen, since they do debuff armor with their shots. The mobility is going to be Spider Riders, really nice against chasing skinks, and that's about it. If the greenskins do have the mobility advantage, they can also chase off large monsters, but that can be a little bit more rare. These guys I expect will be mostly cycle charging skinks. As for the Wolf Rider Chariots, these guys will be especially good against skinks due to their high armor, and will be the main counter to skink skirmishers. And lastly, the hero core of the greenskins, a single orc shaman with Brain Bursta and Grom the Paunch. Interesting. This means the actual single entity fighting power of the greenskin army here is a little bit lacking. But we'll see if that matters as we take a look at the Lizardmen force. Basically 4 Source Warriors, Temple Guard, and skink cohorts with some red crested skinks. The Lizardmen returning the favor, taking a little bit of everything for their infantry front line. It's going to match fairly evenly against the greenskins, with 2 chameleon skinks taking up the flanks and 3 pterodon riders up in the air. Pterodon riders can be a bit of a problem for the greenskins with their drop rocks and their ability to snipe out lords, but they don't have too much damage, and Grom won't be especially worried about them. He'll be more worried about these Cold One riders and this presumably Manticore Summoner, the Skink Priest of Beasts, and even a Slann Mage Priest of Fire with Burning Head. So just taking a look at the armies, it seems like both players are going to be vying to win that infantry fight as well as they can, using their elite infantry to clear up the lords of their opponent as we go into the late game. So that's going to be the main play. To win the infantry fight on the Lizardmen side, they have superior skirmishers and their pterodon riders, and for the greenskins they have their magic and their superior mobility. So both heavy infantry styles with different ways of pulling a lead, This should be pretty exciting as the armies move straight up towards each other and the skirmishing phase is going to begin. The Pterodon riders are getting in some pretty good damage. I actually missed it. These guys are Fire Leech Bolas, and they actually do a lot of damage to goblins. As long as they're not taking too many arrow shots. Both sides sort of trading into each other, but the Fire Leech Bolas trading a little bit better. In the distance, this ROR Pterodon Rider unit just poking away at some Orc boys. Not terribly efficient, but not terribly threatening for them either. And the frontline engage shall be beginning. Greenskins, they'll have to choose their targets wisely with their archers. They definitely don't want to just be firing at skinks all game, and instead they want to be pushing the lizardmen forces back. The chariots too, posing a pretty big threat to the skinks, will be stopping them from engaging, and now we're seeing even the goblins getting a little bit hasty moving up to engage, since there's not a whole ton to really pose a threat against them. Now, the cohort of Sotek, I also forgot, I need to this real quick. There we go. Sorry for that. So the cohort of Sotek is now engaging into the front line, but the archers have decided to focus fire onto them, which buys time for the Pterodon riders to throw down their rock drops, and we'll see if that's effective, as the archers do actually pull out of range, but no! The Pterodon riders are going for the Black Orcs instead, and it looks like no damage is dealt on that front. As for the frontline fight, both sides trading fairly evenly, but it looks like the lizardmen are pulling ahead just a tiny bit. Some nice pullback play from Carl Harmon with his skinks, so that his Saurus warriors could more better win the frontline fight, which is a pretty effective trade, but now the more elite troops of the Greenskins are filling in the front, and so far it's mostly even trades. Grom, however, has actually taken a lot of damage so far, and if he goes down, that is almost assuredly a pretty clear win for the lizardmen. Diving straight towards the Slann Mage Priest of Fire, but a big AoE onto these Black Orcs. Looks like no dodge comes down and the banishment rips through them for actually a surprisingly little amount of damage. And the front line continues to go on. One of the major sources of damage for the Greenskins, though, are being bogged up by the Pterodon riders and some infantry. So that's a nice win for the lizardmen, and a huge burning head too could actually pull things in their favor. The Saurus warriors are still doing relatively healthy, but the Greenskins, they now have their Black Orcs engaged, and they've had a really hard time actually killing off the Black Orcs for the majority of this game. As for the Squig Hoppers and Spider Riders, they're losing out to the Cold One Riders as expected, and that will secure the backline of the lizardmen fairly well, but a big problem actually coming down for them is Grom the Paunch actually coming in to hit up the Slann Mage Priest of Fire. If that guy goes down, it's going to be a pretty big loss. We may see routes from the lizardmen on a lot of their infantry, but all of their troops are actually performing pretty well on the leadership front, so that might not even matter. A huge pick on the Black Orcs too with the red crested skinks is basically the most effective trade that the lizardmen can get here. And now the Greenskins don't really have a front line. That's going to be quite the problem for them. Their archers getting in the remaining shots that they can while they are still operational. And we'll see if Grom is able to hard carry here. He is a very hard target to take down given the current state of the game, and that could actually just win things out for the Greenskins fully. There we go. He does take down the Lizardman Lord, but Grom is running out of support very rapidly. You can see all the Greenskin forces are being chased off or routed, and there's a lot of Lizardmen infantry, but the bane of infantry are indeed chariots, and Grom might be able to pull it out. It's only that he's at pretty low HP, which means he might just get routed off as we head into the late game. The remaining ammunition of these Pterodon riders firing into him. Paul Harmon knows that this is definitely one of the biggest threats in the remainder of the game. But some nice play. The Teeth Robbers have actually been babysat for a lot of this game, and their HP is insanely high. they'll be able to cycle charge to their heart's content and can't really easily be dealt with. The Lizardmen have very little mass in this situation, and there we go. The ranged firepower actually running out. Their ammunition is starting to get low. And a second wall comes down from the greenskins, which will be able to clear a few of these red-crested skinks, but in general not too impactful. What is actually very important though, if you look into the distance, some Forest Goblin Spider Riders are still online and operational. And a few of the archers are coming back, but that's not as important. More so, just Grom the Paunch is able to do so well, and the Beast Caster is actually down for the Lizardmen. That means absolutely no more Manticore summons, and there we go, we're seeing the power of Grom. The balance of power now switching back onto the sides of the greenskins in a pretty surprising turn of events, but I guess it was to be expected since the Lizardmen are going to have to find a way to actually pin this guy down. They do, I think, still have a few Temple Guard units left alive, and they are actually killing off the Wolf Chariots, which will be very important here. They're actually getting bogged down very heavily in this blob, and any picks here could actually cause a win. Grom actually getting pinned down now by the Pterodon Riders. This is exactly what the Lizardmen need to pull out a victory. The Chariots are gone, and is Grom going to actually get routed off to some Temple Guard? That would be absolutely insane. The Greenskin leadership is way too low to accept the loss of their lord. And there we go. Grom actually gets routed off. Absolutely crazy. The balance of power goes back in the favor of the Lizardmen, and oh my goodness, just salt in the wound, the Manticore summon even comes back. It's going to be chasing off Grom and possibly killing him off too. And what might have been a win for the Greenskins actually getting taken away due to that surprise unit of Temple Guard. He might not have noticed it, or he might have just accidentally gone a little bit too far on the charge. They are insanely good in anti-large, and that rapid damage to Grom was just a bit too much. Greenskins losing ground, and it's gonna be army losses. GG. And that is going to be it. Oh my goodness, the Greenskins with a pretty heavy advantage. There was some really nice play with their mobility, really good play with the Chariots in the early and mid game. Just absolute terrors, running the Lizardmen out of ammunition. But when it finally came down to the late game, it was just a single misplay, charging a bit too deep into the Temple Guards, and some nice mass from the Pterodon Riders to really kill off these very important units to pull out the win. My goodness, that was pretty unexpected. I was ready for Grom to just cycle charge for the rest of the, for another 10 minutes to win out the day, especially since he would have been allowed to, given that, whoops, wrong button. Given that Grom had these Chariots, another multi-model unit, he could have just cycle charged until the end of the game, but there we go. That's how the cookie crumbles. Here we go. For the next game, we have Enticity, that being myself, playing for ODM up against EC's Eltharion. I forgot to change my camera settings, so things may be a little bit glidey for me as we play this game, but it shouldn't be too much of a problem. I have brought my classic Vampire Coast gun build in this situation. The matchup is a little bit rough, given that the vampire counts can find pretty clean counters to this situation, but the build is designed where a single misplay could really ruin you as the vampire counts. We brought some gunnery wights into the situation to throw down AoEs, clear out any crypt ghouls, and bombers will be doing similarly. The Grave Guard are going to get focus fired by the handguns in this situation, and as long as we don't get overwhelmed, we should be good. But vampire counts, they do definitely have a lot of options to do that. black coaches specifically could pose quite a threat in this situation. And the hope is that the gunnery whites will be able to slowly pick them down with their ranged shots. So with all that out of the way, good luck, have fun to our opponent, and then we'll be jumping into this next game. Okay, so should be pretty good. If you look at the army sizes for both players, it is absolutely massive. We have 1,500 troops coming in for the vampire counts, and almost 1,700 for myself. We're both ready, so get into the army of my opponent. It's going to be a very wide build by the looks of it. Some skeleton warriors and no graveguard. Actually going for crypt ghouls instead is going to be... Where is that white line? Wow, it's miles away. Going for crypt ghouls instead, we'll be able to flank down my forces, but this infantry line is actually pretty easy for my bombers to take care of. So we're going to be focusing them with the bombers. We'll turn off fire at will with them, since we don't want to be wasting our ammo on zombies. Our cannon, we'll be looking for some cavalry to shoot, likely these black knights trying to take to the flanks. And in the meantime, we'll just focus fire some of these skeletons and so on. The gunnery whites can move up since their ranged attacks are really long, and they can start poking away at some zombies. There are some flyers here too for the vampire counts, just a few terrorgeists though, and I can focus them down using my handguns. We'll pull back with the handguns just so that they're a little bit more spread apart. And the fellbats are going to be a little bit of an issue. The handguns can shoot and fire in on them, but it will be a little bit hard to actually kill all of them before they get to engage onto my lines. The cavalry too. Now on the flanks, we're going to begin focus firing that to take it down. And the terrorgeists, well, we're just getting ready to shoot it with our guns. The idea here is that the guns should be facing the bats before the... Yeah, the guns should be facing the bats, essentially, before the bats even get in range. Because if the bats do actually dive in on top of them, that's going to be an absolutely insane loss of damage that we definitely cannot face in this situation. Skeleton warriors are moving in now to try and dive in onto my backline. And we may get overwhelmed on the infantry front, but it might not be too bad. Just taking a look at the situation. Let's see, our bombers are able to fire. We can throw down a scab scrat too. But the banshees are now coming in, and they are going to be a little bit of a problem here. The terrorgeist moving in too, and some black knights I will have to deal with. But we've done some pretty good work on the front lines so far. Bombers are still doing good, and Noctilus is available with his summons. We'll want to take out these black knights at the very least though. We're going to put down a summon to stop these skeleton warriors. Our handguns are going to turn and fire onto these black knights, try and take them out, while our gunnery whites beeline it towards the banshees. They actually do decent amounts of damage there, so that should work out pretty well. Our bombers will move up, and we're actually winning the frontline fight right now, which should be good up until this dragon lord actually comes in and starts ruining my day. He's going to be a little bit difficult to actually take out, but all hope is not lost, since our front line can actually start pulling back to assist our troops. Our handguns are going to be turning to fire in on the Dragon Lord, and if we can get an easy snipe out on him, that will definitely be a huge advantage for us. But the flanks are beginning to fall, many of our guns are occupied, and the Dragon Lord has landed, but the guns are firing. We're actually going to turn all guns onto him to try and take him out. The gunnery whites will be continuing to fight the banshees. They still fare decently well there. And we have our scab scrats to win out against the crypt ghouls and skeleton warriors. So there we go. Some more scab scrats going down. Our infantry are repositioning. Balance of power has turned towards our advantage, but that is a little bit of a deceptive deceptive situation, since my guns actually offer a lot to the balance of power. Same with my infantry, and the crypt ghouls will be able to cause a lot of problems on that front. The Terrorgeist, now landed, can take a lot of damage from my troops, so that should be pretty good. We do manage to chase it away, but the single entities for the vampire counts are still extremely scary. Dragon Lord even flying down now. We'll hit him with the Wraith Storm, and then we're going to focus fire him with the guns to see if he can get taken out. A lot of damage will be coming down, but the question is, will it be enough? A barely alive Dragon Lord is much scarier than is still just as scary as any other. So we'll see how that goes. The Scab Scrath on the Crypt Ghouls will help a lot though, getting in a lot of damage, but we're beginning to run out of our ranged firepower. Nevertheless, our infantry has traded mostly evenly in this game, but there are still 2 units of Crypt Ghouls. The Gunnery Wights have taken a lot of damage too, just from the cycle charging and the Sirens, and that could just decide the game here, especially if the Gunnery Wights die. I'm going to try and pull them back into a safer position to just to make sure that they're able to sit back and continue shooting the dragons. But they're very low, and it looks like that may actually cause a game loss here. But I still have a Scab Scrath that will be used to shut down the Crypt Ghouls, since they are the main anti-infantry. The Dragon Lord is actually fairly low on HP, and the zombie halberds are coming in to support. The halberds will be extremely effective versus the Dragon Lord, and if he takes enough damage from the Gunnery Wights, it could turn to a victory here. A lot of the Vampire Count's force is actually crumbling away, and suddenly things are looking a little bit better here. Balance of power still not in my favor though, especially because the Crypt Ghouls are such a pain in this situation. But Noctilus is putting in a lot of damage onto this Terrorgeist, and we're now seeing the healing cap for the Dragon Lord. 2 Banshees still alive though are going to be a bit of a problem, and like I said earlier, the Crypt Ghouls are very, very bad in this situation. They'll be able to kill many of my troops. So Scab Scrath on top of them is going to be of the utmost importance. Throwing that down, hopefully killing out most of them. Meanwhile, the Gunnery Wights focus firing the Dragon Lords, and we'll continue throwing down heals on top of them just to keep them safe. Now the Dragon Lord has landed. The Gunnery Wights are going to move in to try and focus fire him. Since if we can actually kill him off, that would be absolutely amazing. Wraith Storm slamming on in, and he's getting extremely low, with the Gunnery Wights now going to use their range shots to try and pick him off. But will it matter? The Banshees are still alive and at high HP, and without a lot of infantry left, it could be really rough. Nevertheless, the Dragon Lord, he will be getting very low, but just barely not dead. And the main problem here are indeed those Banshees. Will they get killed off, or will they win out the day? We do have another Scab Scrath to clear out the rest of the infantry at the very least. But Noctilus, he is extremely low. The Banshees are doing good, and a breath attack coming on in. Will I be able to dodge it? Oh no, I do not. And the Gunnery Wights get extremely low. Dragon Lord flying to a much safer position, waiting for the late game where he won't get sniped out. And here we go. We are now on to the very late game here, with the 2 Banshees hammering down the Gunnery Wights. It looks like the Vampire Counts, with some nice engagements and flanks on the infantry, will be able to take out the victory against the forces of my Vampire Counts. Noctilus trying his best to fight out against the single entities, but can he actually kill off the Banshees and a Terrorgeist at full HP? I think likely not, but RNG has gone my way before, so I'm going to still play it out just in case Noctilus gets some very lucky hits. He also has a backup summon in case it's needed. So it's just grinding out the game now. There's honestly not a lot for me to micro, so I'll put it on ×4 in case my opponent wants that. But he'll have to focus pretty heavily on cycle charging to actually make sure that no disasters actually go down here. Noctilus focus firing the Terrorgeist since he is anti-large, and that is actually a fairly effective trade for him. We also have healing in the back pocket, which will be very good. And it looks like the Banshees actually don't have much healing left. The vampire counts have used up a lot of their winds of magic to heal up the dragons. And Noctilus is actually doing decently okay against the Banshees. Not amazing, but like I said, a few lucky hits could turn the tide of battles here. I'm going to continue issuing attack orders onto the Banshees to make sure that they actually go down. And oh no, the zombie summons are more expensive now. I can't summon my zombies at 9 winds of magic, so instead I'm going to go for a heal and see if Noctilus can take out this Terrorgeist. He will be healing up to nearly full HP. The Banshees are at about half HP, so we'll continue to play it out. Good RNG, of course, could always come into play. We'll buff up the Winds of Magic to try and fit in a second healing spell on Noctilus. And he's doing okay here. It really depends on if the Banshees can actually finish him off. Of course, it doesn't help that the Crypt Ghouls have managed to pull off a surround on him. But it could go well, it could go terribly. Terrorgeist coming on in to charge for a second time. Probably the biggest threat to Noctilus, since it will be able to continue getting those charge attacks, and it looks like one more attack will likely cause army losses. And there we go. The vampire counts coming out on top and pulling out a win up against the coast. Oh my goodness. A win for Eltharion and the clan of EC. GG, and very well played. You can see the mass infantry style, very difficult to deal with. Even though the bombers were able to get a few volleys off, it was against some very cheap targets. Instead, they should have been focusing those Crypt Ghouls. As you can see, the Crypt Ghouls did get a ton of value jumping my troops, and that would have definitely been the better play. The handguns were actually pretty good. They paid for themselves before dying off, but they could not kill off enough of these troops. They did almost kill off Manfred, and that could have actually turned things pretty well in our favor, but probably just not enough guns, at least for this type of build. So there we go, GG, and we'll be moving on to the next game now. Now, this next match, Mimont up against Chosen One, Dark Elves against Wood Elves. Usually a bad matchup for the Dark Elves, but they can definitely pull it back in some situations. And in this case, it looks like the build is going to be a Dark Rider style of play. 4 Dark Riders coming in with 2 Cold One Knights, actually 3 of them, with a pretty chunky front line too, of Black Ark Corsairs and Spears. Some Reaper Bolt Throwers are also online and available, which run a little bit of a risk of getting rushed and picked off by Arrows of Kronos and so on, but if they are able to stay online, they can do pretty well in this situation, picking off cavalry and flyers specifically. Malekith too, coming in on a Cold One by the looks of it, will be a nice duelist, but he does run the risk of getting picked off, so investing less money into him seems to have been a good idea. Now for Chosen One, coming in on the red side, it's going to be a Wood Elf, sort of a skirmish build by the looks of it, air skirmish in this case, with 3 Hawk Riders, 2 Glade Guard Hagbane tips for that wonderful poison, and the Sisters of Twilight. The infantry is extremely thin for the Wood Elves, and they definitely can't take a direct engagement. They'll have to be as careful as possible, but if they can get enough picks off in the early to mid game, their cavalry will be more than enough to clear out all the Dark Elf infantry. So let's see how that goes. As we get into the game, I also missed a unit of Doomfire Warlocks also, who are very nice in many of the cavalry fights. Their Soul Stealer will melt down any blobbed up Wood Elf units, and given that there are so few Wood Elf units, that magic will be absolutely devastating. So, as the game begins, should be good. Looks like both players are ready. And it's just a simple process of starting up the match. And here we go, it has begun. Both sides taking a moment to inspect each other's forces. The Sisters of Twilight will have almost free reign on the situation on the left-hand side. They'll be able to use their AoE shots if they want to kill off infantry. They can also pick off cavalry, and also use their single entity sniping ability to kill off Malekith. Could be pretty important, but Minimont actually disconnects from the game. Looks like we're gonna have to rehost that one real quick. So here we go, we've reloaded into the game. The positions of the armies are exactly the same as last time. Good luck, have fun, and let's get into the game. The main threat here for these skirmishers are the bolt throwers, but it seems like Chosen One actually has the air dominance in its entirety. There are no units that can shoot up except for the bolt throwers, and immediately we're going to see the Hawk Riders beeline it straight towards these guys to pick them out as quickly as possible. Keeping these Hawk Riders alive will save a lot of ammunition for Chosen One, but the bolt thrower shots do ring out. They fire up into the air and miss the Hawk Riders, and one volley goes down, brings the bolt throwers very low, and another one should rout it off. But we're seeing Miniont moving up as the Dark Elves. He's going to be trying to take as fast an engagement as possible against the Wood Elf infantry here, and that is a very good play. If they do manage to kill off everything here before the skirmishers kill all of the very important cavalry and Malekith, the remaining forces of the Spearmen and the Black Ark Corsairs could actually just kill off the Hawk Riders outright. So taking this engagement as quickly as possible will be of the utmost importance, but some skirmishers firing in onto the Slaanesha's Harvesters, but as soon as they get their nice charge onto this infantry, they should be able to get a lot of damage. In fact, the infantry for the Dark Elves in general is very, very strong, and they should be able to overrun the forces of the Wood Elves. Some cavalry engagements do go down. Counter charges from the Dark Riders, not too punishing. And speaking of punishing, what will actually hurt are these Wild Riders slamming right in, and those Dark Riders already down to almost half HP will be having a bit of a rough time. However, the Spears will be able to push back the Wild Riders, and with the mainline engagement going down, we're seeing the Wood Elf front line is collapsing, but the Sisters of Twilight and the Hawk Riders are able to pick off basically whichever targets they want, going for the Slaanesha's Harvesters as they are the most expensive forces here. They will likely get routed off in just a second, but not before a really nice Soul Stealer comes in. Big Pendulum though actually comes down, and there we go. That is about 1,000 gold worth of damage, maybe a tiny bit less, but nevertheless a lot of damage, and that is a huge loss for the Dark Elf forces. Their cavalry is now routing, and that is actually really bad. The Black Ark Corsairs too getting nearly routed off. Malekith throwing down an AoE onto the Eternal Guard, but not nearly as much damage. In the meantime, the Wood Elf backline is actually getting compromised. A lot of their cavalry is getting caught out, and very importantly, Malekith is still at full HP. If the ammunition for the Wood Elves runs out by the end of the game, Malekith is strong enough to possibly solo a lot of the Wood Elf forces, as long as he doesn't have to fight too many spears. Now the cavalry getting routed off. The Wild Hunters are still at pretty nice HP, and they're going to chase off these Cold One Knights, but they are taking a lot of damage themselves. The Dark Elves are actually slowly beginning to get their way through the front line. A huge AoE comes down too onto these Eternal Guard, and that's the Wood Elf front line beginning to break. They're going to dive in. Malekith even sniping out the caster of the Wood Elves, and the Wood Elves really need these Wild Hunters to finish off the infantry. Without the Wild Hunters, the Dark Elf infantry should be able to tank the rest of the ammunition and probably win the day, but the balance of power doesn't especially like them. Just nevertheless, the balance of power not especially reliable, especially in these types of game states. A lot more trading going down too, but the Slaaneish's Harvesters managing to actually stay alive into the late game will be able to charge into the Wild Hunters of Kurnos and actually finish off a lot of this Wood Elf infantry. The Glade Riders are on the verge of routing, and the Hawk Riders have now run out of ammunition. Nevertheless, they are extremely good melee combatants, especially on the charge, and you can see upon landing, the Slaaneish's Harvesters should get finished off. The Sisters of Twilight too, actually I think Chosen One might have been conserving ammunition on them. As they are able to continue firing, they have enough to kill off Malekith with basically no problems. And with that, I think the cycle charging of the Hawk Riders will likely be able to finish off the rest of the Dark Elf forces. Despite the Wood Elves losing most of their infantry, they do have just barely enough to tank these charges, and we're going to see a big devastating charge onto these Dread Spears, insane amounts of damage onto them, and they're going to get routed off. And at this point, it's just Malekith left. Sisters of Twilight will be able to handle him easily, and even though a very nice AoE does come down, it likely will not be enough. Sisters of Twilight, a decent melee combatant too, will be able to kill off Malekith if they do have to fight him in melee, although it will be a little bit of a closer engagement. Hawk Riders continuing to cycle charge will be very important, as there is basically no more Wood Elf infantry, and surprisingly enough, the Wild Hunters of Kurnos at 7 models are able to continue chasing off the Dark Elf troops, proving quite useful even in the very late game. Now, Sisters of Twilight they've changed their battle plan and gone for their AoE shots against the infantry, seemingly not too worried about fighting Malekith in a straight up fight, or maybe just confident that the remaining ammunition will be able to pick him off. As we see now, the Sisters of Twilight just continuing to shoot down onto him, as all of his supporting infantry now gets routed off. So that will likely be the end of poor old Malekith here. Few more shots can go down, but actually, okay, just taking a little bit of time to reload. Malekith is quite low now, but we can't rule out a crazy Soul Stealer here to win out the game. If the Sisters of Twilight run out of ammunition, everything is going to have to eventually fight Malekith, and a Soul Stealer plus some good hits on the Sisters of Twilight could win out the game for Mini. It just really depends if Malekith has enough HP not to die to the Sisters of Twilight. He turns towards them, and he does have a bronze shield, so he does actually prevent a good amount of that damage. It just depends if that Soul Stealer comes down. Another shot comes in, and it doesn't look like it. It's going to be army losses for the Dark Elves, and GG, a win for ODM. It's going to be 5 wins now in these 7 matches. And the next match is going to be with Slayer and their opponent. Taking a look at the Wood Elf troops, all of them managed to pay for themselves except for the infantry, as is the usual. And the Dark Elves, really, the main problem for them was they did not have the tools to deal with this air squad. In the end, they managed to snipe everything out, but it was still pretty close. So starting off between Slayer and Marcus Magno, Tomb Kings, and the Norskins for Slayer. It's going to be starting off with Slayer's Force a nice mix of Marauders and Berserkers, very standard when it comes to Norska. Some Fimir Warriors, ROR, for their immune to terror. Skin Wolves taking up the flanks to shut down Ushapti Great Bows and other ranged Tomb King's units. And the usual, Burning Head Fimir Caster with Fireball and Throg, with his ability to stay alive. The Javelins too, a very high DPS Norscan unit that simply has to be protected to secure the victory. And the wonderfully good Beasts of Tashnar with their anti-skirmish missile resist. Won't be super important, but definitely relevant, as the Tomb Kings have brought in their skeleton horse archers. They'll mostly be trading out with the Beasts of Tashnar. Some chariots too, which are very good against all this infantry. And for the core of the Tomb Kings, a lot of skeleton warriors. Here, good luck, have fun. A lot of skeleton warriors, the ROR Tomb Guard, Pepper Guard, and for their hero squad, a Sphinx, Necro Sphinx, ROR, Necrotect, and Cetra on a chariot. So not an extremely devastating single entity killing force here, mostly a force to deal with infantry. So Slayer is going to have to focus quite hard on actually protecting his infantry from getting hit up by all these forces. He doesn't want his berserkers to take archer fire from the horse archers. And Slayer definitely doesn't want chariots in his infantry at all. So it'll come down to how well the players actually control, and if these very important forces get traded out. The infantry, however, for the Tomb Kings will dissolve rather quickly, so it's on the Tomb Kings to actually put in as much damage as quickly as possible. And there we go, we're seeing some nice play, getting in the volleys onto the Berserkers. We'll be trading up in this situation, disrupting the front line, and even some possible cycle charging available against these Marauders on the right flank. Looking like mostly staying away, since the Beasts of Tashnar are ready to support. But Cetra, confident about diving in, goes straight into the Marauders, charged by the Beasts of Tashnar, but the Necro Sphinx is there to support, and that will tip the fight in the favor for the Tomb Kings on this right flank. As for the left flank, some skeleton spearmen get charged in on by these Skin Wolves, and that's a pretty nice trade for the Tomb Kings. Even if they don't do a lot of damage, they will stall out the Skin Wolves for a very long time. And there we go. This right flank overload going fairly well. And in general, things have been looking good for the Tomb Kings, but things could change very rapidly, as some possible spells could go down here, and the Javelins are going to be doing a lot of damage. We're seeing immediately the Necrotect takes a ton of damage from the initial volley, going down to 2/3 HP, but the Javelins are now compromised, and a big pull from Norska to try and support. But the Tomb Kings are ready with their infantry, and a nice pull from the Fimir to make sure that Throg can actually come in. Nevertheless, one Hunter Javelin is now gone. A big Burning Head, though, does come down, and it kills off 2 units of skeletons, and even continues onwards to kill a few more models at the far flank. We'll leave some Norscan troops in the late game to come in and assist. But a much more important fight over here. The Skin Wolves have engaged, and a lot of the Tomb King's support is actually in a bit of trouble. Chariots are surrounded by the Beasts of Tashnar, and the single entities are surrounded by Skin Wolves. Although Throg doesn't want to stay in a fight too long against this Necro Sphinx, could be in a pretty rough situation, and a single hit taking out 1/3 of his HP already, a second one bringing him down to half HP, and this might be the break that the Tomb Kings need to pull an advantage here. The Javelins desperately trying to get in enough damage onto the Sphinx, but it might not be enough. However, it lays off, it doesn't decide to chase Throg, and he will be coming back with his regeneration to help out in the fight, although he'll have to be very careful to make sure he doesn't get killed. There is also a lot of Norscan forces here too. The Fimir Mist Stalkers and the ROR Berserkers with their Unbreakable is probably what's going to give the main advantage for the Norskins here. These guys with their almost unbreakable status and really pull down the single entities no problem, and especially the Fimir are going to be really hard to take down. The Skin Wolves, however, will be getting routed off, and that will work out quite well for the Tomb Kings, etc. Plowing through the javelins, but may very well get punished by Throg. However, he does just barely manage to escape. Fireball comes down and actually hits a friendly Fimir unit. A little bit of a misplay just because the hail is blocking the line of sight on Cetra. And here we go. It's just essentially a big melee grind now. The Kepler Guard aren't really able to support all these Tomb King's monstrous troops, and that's definitely going to be causing a problem here. But just based on the positioning, it seems like the Kepler Guard won't really be able to make it there. A nice burning head does clear out a lot of skeletons. And here we go, the final engagement. Throg actually taking quite a bit of damage, but not before dealing a lot with his supporting troops. The Sphinx going down rather quickly to these Mist Stalkers will be on its way out in just a second. And there we go, the balance of power now swinging very favorably into the forces of the Norskins, and the Tomb Kings getting taken out. Some pretty nice play on both sides. Just the one flank for the Tomb Kings getting really melted down by the Burning Head, and their single entities getting surrounded, caught up in fights that they did not want to be in. Take a look at the actual value for many of these units. The Skeleton Horse Archers did get punished pretty hard, just because of the Beasts of Tashnar, etc. And the Sphinx did do a lot of damage, but not enough, sadly. Their supporting forces just were not able to pull through. Fimir Caster getting in a lot of damage, same with the Mist Stalkers. And that's basically it. That is how the Norskin vs Tomb King matchup plays out. So, with the green one versus Super Munchkin, we are seeing a Vampire Counts versus Beastmen matchup. A pretty bad matchup when it comes to the Beastmen, but I guess the green one has some shenanigans up their sleeve. We'll be taking a look at that soon after we see the Vampire Counts build. For the Vampire Counts, some single entities, a Mortis engine, Heinrich Kemmler, and Blood Knights will be definitely winning any mobility fights that they run into at the sake of their infantry, where the infantry is actually really thin for the Vampire Counts. The Beastmen can clear this up. They may be able to pull out a victory. So we'll see if they're able to. Going into their build, we're seeing a lot of Ungor Herd, a fairly cheap infantry frontline for the Beastmen, just enough to brace against the Blood Knights, essentially. Their actual expensive core, instead, going to be relying heavily on their monstrous troops by the looks of it. Going in for 1, 2, and 3 Chaos Spawn, a single unit of Minotaurs with great weapons, Razor Gore Herd with their high AP but pretty low leadership, and 2 Centigores with throwing axes to hopefully kill out the single entities. At least that's what the green one is hoping for. The Gorble 2 on foot coming in will be a pretty big threat to any dragon that lands. For a Shaman of Shadows with no pendulum, just Occam's Mind Razor to really help out any gooning attempts on single entities, and Mogr the Shadow Gave to bring in even more Chaos Spawn than we already see here. A pretty nice fight you in the face Beastmen build with a lot of high leadership troops. We'll have to see how that plays out against the Counts. As the armies are deployed, they're going to be marching towards each other, and the onus is on the Vampire Counts to advance here. Otherwise, they will slowly get skirmished down by the Centigores. They can cycle charge and throw their axes into the expensive Count's troops, and generally get in a lot of damage if they're not too careful here. Just sort of bouncing back and forth, some skirmishing, and nice play, just wasting as few shots as possible on these zombies. It's actually pretty bad to target down zombies, as they do waste your ammunition over time. A little bit more skirmishing though from the Centaurs. They, even though they can't throw their axes into their zombies efficiently, they can cycle charge fairly well, and that could come into play, but it is a pretty risky play to make, since you're only getting a couple golds worth of damage at the risk of your cavalry. It can sometimes trade out pretty badly. However, some nice picks over here on the left flank. The Blood Knights taking a few axes to the face, but a return attack from the Vampire Counts is going to be the Terrorgeists actually landing down onto the Centaurs. And in general, it's some pretty even trading, very minor. And that sort of works in the favor of the Vampire Counts. They're just trying to reduce damage on the approach, and if we take a look at their army, most of the troops haven't taken too much damage here. So with the front lines now facing up directly against each other, we're now seeing the zombies begin their approach. The monstrous troops of the Beastmen are ready to go, and they will be able to clear up the zombies fairly easily. The main threat is if they actually get cycle charged by things like the Blood Knights and so on. And some nice play too from the green one, being very conservative with his monstrous troops, since he knows that the zombies will eventually die to the Ungor herd. Some nice damage too onto this Terrorgeist. A little bit of a lapse in micro allows those Centaur throwing axes to get a lot of damage in, but the Vampire Counts now suddenly shifting the melee fight into their favor now that their big monstrous troops have come in. The Terrorgeists go in for a big engage on top of Mogr, and it doesn't look like they're actually doing too much damage, but they're not taking too much themselves either. The dogs do trade themselves out. They will be dying without doing much damage, but it buys time for the Terrorgeists to hit whichever targets they want, and it also buys time for the Mortis engine to get a lot of damage in. So that's definitely good for the Vampire Counts, especially this big surround on a lot of the monstrous troops for the Beastmen, but it is mostly summoned Chaos Spawn. That's not nearly as important here, and it's more of a worry that the Vampire Counts get a lot of their troops caught out here. The Minotaurs actually charge right into the backs of the Blood Knights, and they take a ton of damage on the charge, actually almost near death already. That's a really nice pick from the Beastmen. And even though the dragons or the Terrorgeists are landing and trying to pick out targets, they haven't been able to get the damage they want on Mogr. A big charge does come down on the Chaos Spawn though, which is a nice counter for the Beastmen. They get in some pretty good damage, and as long as the Terrorgeists don't get picked off, then the Vampire Counts will still be okay. But some nice surrounds with the infantry onto these Terrorgeists will actually slow down the retreat. The Minotaurs actually get a pretty nice charge on Kemmler too, and if I'm not mistaken, no, he is on a horse, and he does barely manage to sneak out of there, taking very little damage from the Minotaurs, and actually does barely squeak out, but he's not in the clear yet. He's getting staggered a lot, and there we go, he does make it out safely. The Mortis engine is able to use its effect on this huge group of Beastmen infantry too, and a nice counter charge too from the Vampire Counts will actually get in some pretty good damage, but that might not matter. Their front line is completely disintegrating, and the Beastmen, with a very nice heavy infantry, monstrous infantry build that is looking to be taking a pretty solid lead here. The mass will prevent the Terrorgeists from easily retreating, and if the Mortis engine goes down, it's gonna be game for the Beastmen. They will be able to pull out the victory pretty decisively if that happens, but it's not an easy task. It's quite tanky. The Gorbel is trying his best to take it down, but the Terrorgeists are still flying around and picking off many a target in this huge blob fight, which is pretty disadvantaged for the Beastmen, unless they kill the Mortis engine, since it's constantly doing AoE damage. It's healing up many of these troops too, but it is getting pretty low. Depends on if this Gorbel can actually win it. The Razor Gore rally only to retreat once again, and there we go. We're seeing now the Claw of Nagash barely able to escape. The Centaurs are being screened out by this infantry blob fight, and both players are trying desperately to focus on the Mortis engine. Centaurs trying to loop around to find a better position onto it, but it's just continuing to dance around and bouncing between troops, being very hard to pick off. But some nice Razor Gores coming back into the fight will actually be able to charge in and kill off most of the Blood Knights. And with the current play and build of the Beastmen, it's looking like they will likely drive the Vampire counts down to only their single entities left. And if they can do that, that will be absolutely huge. But the Terrorgeists are still a lot of a pain. Some Minotaurs do charge into the Mortis engine, but it still lives. Oh my goodness, that is probably one of the worst feelings ever for the Beastmen. It gets healed up, and now it's stuck in a huge blob of infantry, mortising them down. Gorbel, nice play, getting in that charge, making sure that he's constantly attacking the Terrorgeist when he can. Breath attack will be coming down onto him though, but it misses. Beastmen staggering backwards at the perfect time will be able to continue fighting, and a big hit onto the Mortis engine. Looks like it will actually be going down. A second hit comes in at 500 health. Actually still quite a bit of HP left. And oh my goodness, the Mortis engine looks like it actually manages to escape. Just the absolute worst case scenario, as the Gorbel gets finished off completely, dying, and is now off the battlefield. And the Mortis engine, although it does fall, the damage is already done. Taking a look at the Beastmen infantry, there's basically none left. Some Ungor Spearmen and Ungor Herd, and that's basically it. The summons of the Vampire counts actually numbering even higher than the Beastmen infantry. Not a great position to be, but it's not over yet. The Centaurs, with their throwing axes, have a lot of damage in on them, but a mistimed throwing attack misses the Vampire charge with the Terrorgeist. It's absolutely brutal, but the second time goes in, and that's a lot of damage on the Terrorgeist. Actually almost gets it to rout off, but the only problem now is that the Centaurs no longer have any ammunition. If there had been a few more volleys left, this actually would have been a really bad situation for the Vampire counts. But the fact that these guys can't use their throwing axes anymore to kill off single entities is going to be causing likely the loss for the green one, unless they're able to pull off a miracle with Mogre. And that's not entirely possible. He actually has some pretty decent melee stats, a lot of troops rallying too, and a full surround by Centaurs will actually do a lot of damage to Terrorgeists. And we're seeing now a full surround does go down. A nice predicted pull away to dodge a breath attack actually only loses 2 Centaur models. The green one is absolutely scrapping this out beautifully, heading into the late stages of the game. A charge on Kemmler too, and the Beastmen might actually pull things back, surprisingly enough. It really depends on how well the Centaurs are microed here. And there we go. A wonderful, beautiful surround onto the Terrorgeist. We'll be pinning it down. Allows these Centaurs to retreat and come in with the charge. But will they actually make it before the Terrorgeist takes off into the air? We'll have to see. I think a slow coming down with the returning Brave Shaman of Shadows. Yeah, it looks like he threw down a slow with the remaining Winds of Magic. Keeps the Terrorgeist on the ground, make sure it can't cycle charge. And now, all of a sudden, the Vampire counts are looking to be in a pretty bad situation. The Mortis engine did a lot of damage, but just barely not enough, since there's still a lot of Beastmen infantry, and they're just constantly bogging down these Terrorgeists. letting the Centaurs cycle charge to their heart's content. And let's not forget to Mogr the Shadow Gave, an absolute beast, just really taking down these Terrorgeists in head-on combat. His combat stats are really good, 55-45 against the much lower 36-42 of the Terrorgeists, meaning that they have to be cycle charging him to actually kill him. And they have had no opportunities to cycle charge this game. They've been constantly hit by these Centaurs, and there we go, the last remaining zombies getting worn down by the vampire counts. Now, it's still not over yet, despite all of that. All these troops are on the verge of routing off. A single charge from the Terrorgeists will likely do that. One of the Terrorgeists, though, actually getting bogged down by a single Ungor Raider, will finally pull through. And another zombie summon actually comes down. That is actually huge for the vampire accounts, because the zombie summons, they make it so that the Terrorgeists can continue cycle charging to their heart's content. And given that Mogr is caught up in all these zombies, it means that he can't really pull in his support from these Centaurs. And like I said, the Terrorgeists will be able to take Mogr down if they are able to go in with their charges. And a pretty nasty hit comes down, but some good RNG for the green one could take out the Terrorgeists too. It pulls away at extremely low HP, the second one actually flying in. And will Mogr be able to hard carry here? We'll have to see, as now both Terrorgeists dive directly on top of him. A good play, pulling the zombies towards the Centaurs to make sure they can't interrupt this gooning attempt on Mogr. And there's still a lot of time left before the zombies disintegrate. Not to mention, the Terrorgeists have now retaken their position, flying up into the air. Kemmler even landing a hit on Mogr, and this could be the deciding moment. Both Terrorgeists fly in onto Mogr. If he gets some lucky hits here, he'll be able to take them out, but some really nice cavalry play, actually circumventing the zombies, getting them in on top of the Terrorgeists, and that is huge for the Beastmen. Green one with a nice pull around with the cavalry. Looks like he'll actually kill off both Terrorgeists here. But if Mogr gets routed off, it might be a terror rout for these Centaurs. His leadership dipped down to very low for a second, but all of a sudden it's back at 36. And I think Mogr, with the assistance of his cavalry, is actually gonna pull it back. Unless the Terrorgeist gets a mighty hit here, but it crumbles away. And that's gonna be it. Oh my goodness, the Beastmen barely able to pull it out in the late game. That was absolutely insane. Oh my goodness. Oh jeez. Wow, a very well earned victory coming in from the green one. Oh my goodness, good game indeed. Wow. I did not expect that. Mogr coming in with the 3,000 damage dealt by himself. Insane. When you include the fact that the Chaos Spawn were also able to pull in value, that's basically what hard carried there. If you look at the Minotaur, he was trying to take out the Mortis engine for a lot of the game, but just barely wasn't able to. That gave Super Munchkin a very strong lead, but the cycle charging on Mogr, just barely not enough. The fact that he was being kept away by the throwing axes too was terrible, and oh my goodness. I think that is the most damage I've ever seen on a single skirmishing unit. 3,000 damage value and 2,300 on the other. Absolutely crazy. The Minotaurs too, actually, with pretty good value. I think just losing those Blood Knights really was the most punishing play here. The Blood Knights could have kept back the cavalry, but as we have seen in many of my streams, cavalry is very important, and that's going to be the game. Go ahead and take the screenshot and move to the next one. And here we go for the second last game of today. It's Alfredino coming in as the Skaven up against the Filler for Francis, always a space girl, coming in as the Wood Elves. For the Wood Elves, it is going to be a Drycha aerial force. They're coming in together. You got some nice summons, you have a lot of powerful healing, which is especially good when it comes to these cavalry units. Specifically, the Sylvan Knights are going to be getting regrowths from aerial, and Drycha will be putting down the damage with her high combat stats and summons. Aerial, actually coming in with the AoEs instead with the Soul Stealer, could be pretty good, but she's quite expensive, and that's a huge loss on expenses for the Wood Elf side. They've also brought some Dryads, cover the front line, some Glade Guard to fire away at the Skaven forces, and Azrai Spears. A lot of anti-Brood Horror tech in this situation, a lot of anti-Hell Pit Abomination. But we're actually not going to see that from the Skaven side. Instead, the Zap Cannon, really nice against casters and large targets. Poison Wind Mortars, as is the tradition with Skaven nowadays. And what looks to be a pretty scary hero blob here. Lord Skrolk and Double Assassin. The Wood Elves are going to have to put in some work if they actually end up in melee against this. But with Ariel coming in with that Soul Stealer, that will likely be enough to kill off the single entities. Still, it'll be a lot of back and forth, and we don't know if that will cut it. Skrolk is actually, and the Double Assassins. The Soul Stealer won't kill them too quickly, and they may just be able to carry here in this game. Especially Skrolk against the Sylvan Knights will be the main source of magic damage, of course, along with the Warp Lightning Cannon. Some ROR Council Guard too with their Unbreakable will be able to finish off Ariel and even Drycha in the late game if they don't take enough damage. So there's a lot going on here for sure. Even some Eshin Triads and some Gutter Runners with poison on the flanks. There's a lot here to manage for the Wood Elves. Really, I guess the biggest advantage they could take here is, of course, their cavalry, routing off many of the Skaven forces and taking a blob fight. Now, immediately, we're seeing the Warp Lightning Cannon hit Ariel for a ton of damage. Look at that. Already going down about a few hundred points of HP. Another shot gets dodged by the cannons, and the Dryads engage in the front line. They will be able to easily mulch these Skaven slaves, but of course it's usually a bait, as the mortars can actually kill off the Dryads at this point. And if that happens, the Wood Elves are a little bit without a front line. Definitely not a great position to go up against, as without a front line, their ranged troops can't do much, and the Skaven melee infantry can sort of overwhelm everything. On the left flank of the Wood Elves, the Sylvan Knights are engaged in combat against the Triads, but they're taking a ton of damage. It looks like Skrolk might have actually hit them with one of his abilities. Or no, actually it's the Wolf Rats coming in with magic damage against the Sylvan Knights. I forgot. The Wolf Rats charging into them actually rout them off immediately, and that's terrible for the Wood Elves. The Skaven, oh my goodness, the Wolf Rat counterpick against the Sylvan Knights, absolutely brutal. The front line though does begin collapsing a bit for the Skaven. The Poison Wind Mortars are out of the question, but Ariel, she's been getting constantly bombarded by the Zap cannons for the entire game. Definitely not enjoying that, and that puts her in a pretty rough position. Sylvan Knights completely off the map now. Glade Riders getting chased off too, and it's looking like a very decisive victory from Alfredino. However, his assassins do get surrounded. Skrolk is a little bit isolated. Perhaps some Soul Stealers here could rout off these single entities for the Skaven. Could change things in the favor for Space Girl. But oh dear, here we go. The Poison Wind Mortars do fire. They're gonna slam right on top of all of these Wood Elf forces here, and those Azrai Spears take so much damage from almost full HP to nothing with a single volley of the poison wind mortars. Aerial to a final shot, knocking her down onto the ground, and another one knocking her for a second time. She's at only 400 HP. She's healing up to the best of her abilities, but the Wood Elves, you don't want to be wasting your healing on aerial. You would much rather have it on the Sylvan Knights, but they're already gone. And there we go. Squolk now coming in to finish the job, doing the work of Throt in the campaign. Gonna be going for aerial. A single attack gets her near death. Drycha now off the battlefield. Army losses kicking in. And a pretty decisive victory for Alfredino. Absolutely brutal. Seems like the Wood Elves really just walked into one of the worst builds they could have faced. The Wolf Rats, I forgot. Not the poison variant, actually the AP variant. That brings in the magic damage. Doing a lot against the Sylvan Knights. And the front line really holding well. Dare I look at the poison wind mortar damage? It's pretty good. 2,500. And all of the Skaven troops really doing well. The Council Guard not even taking damage or seeing combat for the whole game. Not even needed, apparently. It was a pretty nice catch on the Assassins and Squolk. If they had died, things could have gone for Space Girl, but sadly not enough. That's going to be a GG for the second last game of today. And here we go. Ending off the day with a match between Xiphos and Space Girl. It's going to be an interesting build from Xiphos with 2 dragons, Malekith on one of them, and the other just a standard variant. A K-Knight Assassin for his AoEs, many spears, and a whole ton of Cold One Knights, running 3,000 golds worth in that direction. The Cold One Chariots, too, with their ranged ability, not as effective as the Scourge Runners, but actually still quite a bit of damage that they can shoot in onto the Bretonnian cavalry. We'll see if any blob fights go down here, and if they do, we'll be keeping a close eye on the breath attacks for the dragons. That could very well be huge. As for Space Girl, we are seeing a pretty nice air force with 2 Pegasus Knights and Alberic. Oh my goodness, Alberic, you made it! There we go. He's coming in with his trident and some melee attack boosts. Will be able to do fairly well in combat, although he doesn't want to stay too long in a fight against Malekith. Some extra speed and charge bonus can't hurt either. So, go ahead and see how this goes. For the cavalry front, we're seeing Knights of the Realm, more Knights of the Realm, and even more Knights of the Realm. Pretty weak cavalry force as opposed to what Bretonnia could bring, but instead it allows for a much chunkier front line. If you look at these spears, they can hold up these Cold One Knights, and a counter charge from the Pegasus Knights too will be able to absolutely devastate them. Peasant Mob front line can hold down the Dread Spears for some precious seconds for the Bretonnians to set up their charges, and the caster too, a Damsel of Life to keep all of these forces up and running. Now, going into the beginning stages of the game, there will be no skirmishing, and really it's a decision on whether or not these flyers want to engage into each other. For Xiphos, he definitely does not want to be diving straight forwards, as the archers will be able to push things back. But if you look at the Bretonnian side, it's really just the Cold One Chariots and the K-Knight Assassin that the Bretonnians really have to worry about. So they may be tempted to dive in and engage, but 2 dragons are quite difficult to take down. Alberic will be able to put in some pretty good work though, if a big surround comes in, but the might of Soul Stealer can definitely, it cannot be ignored for sure. Some wheeling around to pull away from this unit of Dread Spears. It makes it so that the engagement for the Dark Elves is a little bit longer, and it buys some time for the Bretonnian archers to fire in, but Here we go, we're seeing the initial plays being made. AoE going down onto the pox arrows. That's a lot of damage onto them. They even nearly rout immediately. The chariots come in, and will it be timed well enough? Will the Pegasus Knights actually catch them? That is actually pretty big, but a little bit of an overextension actually. Almost getting caught up by these Cold One Knights, but a safe pull away from them. No real damage being dealt there. Instead, the main advantages are that the two archers are actually very nearly dead, as Malekith manages to do a lot of damage there. And along the right flank, we're seeing he's routing off some peasant archers, doing pretty well. Things are going about even here, and more worryingly for the Bretonians is this left flank over here. It's a huge overload, a ton of cavalry, and a big cavalry fight now going in. Both sides have their spears engaged, but Xiphos has his spears more on top of the Knights of the Realm. A little bit disadvantageous here, but it could swing either way if the archers get engaged. A big surround on Malekith now too, but the Soul Stealer comes down, and the troops pull back, but just barely, not quick enough. They'll be taking some damage, and they shouldn't rout off, but definitely not great for the Bretonians. However, the damage on Malekith is definitely something that can't be shrugged off. He actually did take quite a bit of damage there on that fight, and Alberic going for a killing blow, actually trying to snipe him out, but Malekith hits back, and it looks like Alberic might be the one that faces a pretty rough engagement here. He's now completely surrounded by Dread Spears, and his cavalry is able to support Knights of the Lionhearted, do fairly well there. And this could go either way. It's just Alberic has already taken quite a few hits. The K-Knight Assassin with his AoE on this blob too is absolutely devastating, melting down the cavalry, and Alberic, a brutal loss for the Bretonians, getting gooned out by the double dragon. Malekith with his Soul Stealers has managed to stay fairly high on HP, and the backline of the Bretonians too now crumbling apart. That's going to be it. Alberic is dead, and there is nothing left to deal with these two dragons. Not even the best cavalry surround will be able to do it, and it's just going to be a cleanup now for Xiphos, as you see Base Girl tap out. GG. Some nice play. It was a good skirmishing going on in the early game, but pretty big loss of Alberic. A nice surround on Malekith almost gave some trouble. Could have been a very decisive pick, but that Soul Stealer coming in during the surround and the supporting dragon were really able to put in the damage. You look at the values of the archers too, sadly not getting too much damage in, and the front line mostly being ignored by Xiphos by the looks of it, getting pretty low damage. Pegasus Knights actually did perform decently well here, but looks like that is going to be it.